Captain Elena Vasquez gripped the armrests of her command chair as the USS Vanguard shuddered violently under the onslaught of enemy fire. Alarms blared across the bridge, their piercing wails cutting through the chaos, while red emergency lights strobed across the tense faces of her crew, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters in the dim glow of the consoles. "Status," she barked, her voice slicing through the din like a laser beam, steady despite the knot of urgency twisting in her stomach. Lieutenant Marcus Hale, her tactical officer, slammed a fist onto his console in frustration. Sweat beaded on his forehead, trickling down his temple, but his eyes remained sharp and focused, locked on the flickering readout streaming across his display. "Shields at 40%, Captain. That last volley from the Krath interceptors has breached our outer hull. We're venting atmosphere in sections 3 and 7. Life support's holding for now, but it's a slow bleed." Elena nodded once, her mind racing through tactical options at breakneck speed. The USS Vanguard was a sleek United Earth cruiser, designed primarily for diplomacy and exploration, with defensive capabilities as a secondary priority. But out here, in the treacherous void between the neutral zones and the contested fringes of Krath space, it felt like a sitting duck, exposed and vulnerable. The Krath Dominion had launched this unprovoked assault the instant her ship had crossed into what they claimed as their territory. No prior warnings, no hails for parley, just a sudden storm of plasma fire and swarms of boarding probes lancing towards them like predatory darts. "Engineering," she called out, twisting in her chair towards the comms panel where the connection to the lower decks was patched through. Ensign Lila Torres's voice crackled over the line from below, laced with the raw urgency of someone fighting a losing battle against failing systems. "Captain, reactors are stable but straining under the load," Lila reported, her words punctuated by the distant hum of machinery and the occasional spark of feedback. "We've lost auxiliary power to the jump drive from the overload. I can reroute emergency lines to get it back online, but it'll take at least 20 minutes, if we don't take another direct hit in the meantime. The hull breaches are complicating things. I'm diverting what I can to sealants. 20 minutes, the number hung in the air like a death sentence. Too long by half." Elena's jaw tightened, her fingers drumming a silent rhythm on the armrest as she assessed the tactical display. The 3 Krath ships, angular predators with their hulls etched in glowing energy lances, circled the Vanguard like a pack of wolves, their transmissions a garbled snarl of demands for immediate surrender, and the handover of the diplomatic envoy. She wasn't about to comply. The fragile peace accords she carried were the culmination of decades of human effort, clawing a place for Earth at the Galactic Council's table, after being dismissed as primitives for so long. Alien hotheads like the Krath wouldn't undo that legacy with a show of force. "Helm, initiate evasive pattern Delta 7, Elena ordered, leaning forward as she plotted the course mentally. "Get us behind that asteroid cluster. Use the debris field for cover." The field was the remnants of a long-abandoned mining operation, a jagged maze of rock and ice from a shattered moon that could provide the breathing room they desperately needed. "Aye, Captain," Petty Officer Raj Singh replied from the helm station, his fingers flying across the controls with practiced precision. The ship lurched as the thrusters fired in sequence, propelling them towards the sanctuary of the asteroids. But the Krath were relentless predators. Another barrage lit up the view screen in a cascade of brilliant plasma streaks, slamming into the Vanguard's flanks and shaking the deck plates with bone-jarring force. Sparks erupted from a nearby console, showering the bridge in fleeting embers, and Marcus cursed under his breath, batting away a stray cinder. "Direct hit to the dorsal sensor array," he reported grimly, his voice tight as he rerouted power to compensate. "Sensors are blind on the starboard side now. They're closing fast. Estimated time to boarding range is 2 minutes." Elena's pulse thrummed in her ears, a steady drumbeat matching the ship's alarms. She glanced at the holographic tactical display hovering above the central console. The Krath flagship, a behemoth twice the size of the Vanguard, loomed like a shadowed blade unsheathed from the void, its energy fields pulsing with malevolent intent. This wasn't a mere skirmish. It was a deliberate statement from the Dominion, who had long chafed under the Galactic Council's rulings. Human-voted sanctions had checked their expansionist empire, forcing concessions they viewed as humiliations. And now, with Elena carrying the latest diplomatic proposals that could further bind their ambitions, they'd chosen violence over words, striking first to send a message. "Arm all torpedo tubes," she commanded, her tone steady and unyielding despite the cold knot of dread forming in her gut. If they want to fight, we'll give them one they'll remember long after the stars fade. Marcus hesitated for a split second, his cautious nature flickering in his eyes. He was the tactician who always weighed the odds twice before committing. But he complied without further argument, his fingers dancing over the weapons controls. Torpedoes hot and ready, targeting the lead ship's engine nacelles for maximum disruption. Lila's voice broke in over the comms again, urgent and clipped. "Captain, I've got a workaround patched into the jump drive, but it'll overload the stabilizers. We might end up limping badly after the jump, or worse, stranded in the middle of nowhere if the fields collapse." "Better than being captured and paraded as trophies," Elena replied without hesitation. "Execute the reroute," saying, "Plot a micro-jump to the edge of the asteroid cluster. We hit them hard on the way out, then vanish into the debris." The Vanguard groaned in protest as it accelerated towards the asteroid field, the view screen filling with the approaching maze. A labyrinth of tumbling rocks and glittering ice shards, remnants of cosmic violence from eons past. Elena felt the full weight of command settle deeper into her bones. Her crew was small and handpicked for this high-stakes diplomatic run. Marcus, the witty tactician who masked his underlying fears with layers of sarcasm. Lila, the brilliant engineer whose cautious innovations had saved their skins more than once. Raj, the unflappable pilot whose gambler's luck seemed to defy the odds time and again. 4 souls against the wrath of an entire empire. A proximity alert screamed through the bridge, its shrill tone overriding the other alarms. The craft boarding probes were inbound now, sleek black darts streaking towards the hangar bays with unerring precision. "Point defense online," Marcus shouted, his hands a blur as he activated the automated kinetic turrets. Bursts of rounds lanced out into the void, shattering 2 probes in brilliant flares of exploding debris, but the third slipped through the defensive net, embedding itself in the hull with a resounding metallic thud that reverberated through the deck. "Boarders!" Raj yelled, his usual calm fracturing for the first time, his voice rising in pitch as he glanced at the intrusion alerts flooding his secondary display. "They're cutting into the cargo hold right now." Elena's hand instinctively went to the sidearm holstered at her hip, her fingers closing around the grip. There was no time left for elaborate plans. This had devolved into raw survival. "Armory detail, hold the line in the hold." "Marcus, you're with me, we're going down there." "Lila, get that jump drive singing no matter what." "Raj, keep us moving and buy us every second you can." As she bolted from the bridge, the ship bucked violently under yet another volley from the Krath fleet, the impacts sending shock waves through the structure. The corridor lights flickered erratically, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to reach for her like grasping claws. Elena's boots pounded against the grated flooring, the sound echoing sharply with Marcus close at her heels, his pulse rifle already unslung and ready. The air grew thick with the acrid smell of scorched wiring, and the strange ozone-tinged scent of alien technology infiltrating the ship. They rounded a corner to the outer hatch of the cargo bay, where sparks were flying from the breach point in a chaotic fountain of light. Through the haze of smoke and venting gases, Elena caught sight of the first Krath warrior emerging from the tear in the hull, tall and insectoid, its chitinous armor gleaming dully under the emergency lights, multifaceted eyes glinting with cold intelligence. It raised a plasma rifle with deliberate menace, its mandibles clicking in a guttural challenge that needed no translation. Elena fired first, her sidearm shot echoing like thunder in the confined space. The warrior staggered back, a smoking hole in its torso plate, but more were pouring through the widening breach, their chittering calls filling the air like the buzz of an angry swarm. This was the dark underbelly of the Council's legacy. Aliens who had begun with diplomatic words now finishing with claws and energy blades, unraveling decades of fragile peace. But humanity didn't yield easily. Elena dropped to one knee behind a stack of cargo crates, her rifle, swapped from her sidearm mid-stride, barking twice more in rapid succession. The second Krath crumpled to the deck, green ichor spraying across the metal grating in a viscous arc. But the third leaped over its fallen kin with unnatural agility, its claws scraping furrows into the deck as it closed the distance in a blur. "Flank left!" Marcus shouted, swinging his rifle in a wide, controlled arc. He squeezed the trigger, energy bolts sizzling through the air and catching the warrior mid-stride. It twisted in agony, screeching a piercing cry before slamming into a bulkhead with limbs twitching spasmodically. Elena glanced back towards the corridor where the ship's alarms continued to wail in a relentless pulse. that matched the frantic beat of her heart. "We can't hold them here indefinitely. The breach is too wide. More are coming through every second." Marcus nodded, sweat beading on his brow beneath the harsh glow of his helmet light. He was the cautious one, always calculating angles and potential exits before committing to a fight. But even he moved now with a grim, unyielding purpose. "Seal the hatch. Deploy the emergency foam. It'll buy us time to regroup and fall back." She scrambled to the control panel beside the hatch, her fingers flying over the keys with desperate speed. The Krath were pouring in faster now, their chittering communications echoing like the prelude to a hive assault. One of them fired a plasma burst that melted a nearby console in a shower of molten sparks and twisted metal, the heat wave singeing the edge of Elena's sleeve as she ducked instinctively. "Foam deploying," she grunted through gritted teeth, slamming the override switch. Thick, white sealant erupted from hidden vents along the edges of the breach, hissing as it expanded rapidly to fill the jagged tear in the hull. It slowed the influx dramatically, trapping two warriors mid-emergence, their limbs flailing futilely against the hardening mass as it encased them like a cocoon. But it wouldn't hold forever. The Krath's plasma weapons could burn through the foam in minutes, turning their temporary barrier into slag. Elena grabbed Marcus's arm, pulling him towards the far end of the bay. "The bridge is compromised if they push through here. We head to engineering, reroute power from there, get the automated turrets back online to cover our retreat." He fired another precise shot, dropping a straggler that had slipped through just before the foam fully set, its body slumping with a wet thud. "Engineering's 2 decks down. Elevators are offline from the power surges. Ladders it is." They bolted for the access hatch at the opposite end of the bay, their boots thudding against the vibrating floor as the ship groaned under fresh impacts from the pursuing Krath fleet outside. Elena's mind raced even as they moved. The Galactic Council had brokered peace among the stars for decades, with humans often serving as impartial mediators. But the Krath, driven by their hive-mind grudges and expansionist zeal, saw every concession as a betrayal, every sanction as a personal affront. They started this with their defiance of the sanctions, she'd heard diplomats whisper in the council's halls. Now they were finishing it with invasion and boarding actions. A side door to the bay buckled inward behind them with a screech of protesting metal, and a Krath scout burst through, smaller and faster than the full warriors, its mandibles snapping hungrily as it assessed the corridor. Marcus pivoted smoothly to face it, but the creature was on him in a blur. Knocking the rifle from his grip with a sweeping claw, he grappled with it hand to chitin, grunting as its claws raked across his armor, seeking purchase in the joints. Helena spun on her heel, aiming with careful precision despite the adrenaline surge. Her shot pierced the scout's jointed leg, eliciting a piercing whine as it recoiled. Marcus seized the opening, shoving the creature back with a burst of raw strength before stomping down hard on its weakened limb, cracking the exoskeleton with a satisfying crunch. "Got it, keep moving," he gasped, retrieving his rifle as they sealed the bay door behind them. Just in time, muffled blasts rocked the panel from the other side as the Krath tested its integrity, their frustration palpable even through the reinforced plating. The ladder shaft waited ahead, a narrow vertical tunnel plunging into the ship's bowels, its rungs slick with condensation from the overworked environmental systems. Elena went first, descending hand over hand with controlled urgency, the cold metal biting into her palms. Marcus followed immediately, covering their rear with his rifle trained downward, ready for any pursuers who might breach the door. "How many do you think made it aboard?" he asked between labored breaths, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "Scans showed 3 boarding pods deploying," she replied, her focus on the descent. "At least 20 warriors per pod, give or take. But if we can lock down engineering, we reroute power to the vents, flush entire sections and space the bastards." They emerged onto the engineering deck, where the low thrum of the reactors filled the air like a distant heartbeat. The space bathed in the bloody hues of red emergency lighting. Consoles sparked intermittently, and a lone technician, Javier Ruiz, wiry and quick-witted, one of Lila's assistants, huddled behind the main power panel. His tools scattered around him as he worked frantically. "The captain's on the bridge," Elena said as they approached, her tone brooking no argument. "We're in charge down here now. What's the status?" Javier looked up, his eyes wide but steady, unflinching in the face of the crisis. "Auxiliary powers holding steady, but the breaches fried the targeting arrays completely. The turrets are blind. They're firing wild if we activate them at all. Marcus leaned over the readouts, his tactical mind already assessing. Reroute from life support systems. Dim the internal lights across the ship. Give us a stealth edge for a counter-maneuver while we regroup. Elena bent over the primary controls, her fingers plotting the necessary changes with swift efficiency. But as she worked, a new alarm blared to life, a proximity warning that cut through the hum like a knife. They're cutting through the bay door already. The foam's been breached faster than I thought. Javier cursed in Spanish, grabbing a plasma cutter from his toolkit with hands that trembled only slightly. I can weld on some reinforcements to the inner hatch, but it'll take a few minutes. The deck shuddered violently beneath their feet, not from an external hit this time, but from something more insidious. The craft's larger ship had latched onto the Vanguard's hull, its drilling mechanisms boring deeper into the structure like a parasite seeking the heart. The plan's starting to crack, Marcus said flatly, his voice devoid of its usual wit. We need something else. Improvise now. Elena's gaze fell on a secondary screen displaying the cargo manifests, flickering amid the power fluctuations. Among the emergency supplies listed were mining charges, originally intended for asteroid deflection during survey operations. Her mind clicked into place like a well-oiled mechanism. Those mining charges, rig them to the outer hull plating, she instructed, the idea solidifying as she spoke. When the next wave of boarders tries to latch on, we detonate. It'll shake them off like ticks from a dog, disrupt their boarding entirely. Javier's eyes lit up with understanding, though caution lingered in his expression. It's risky as hell, Captain. The shock waves could propagate through our own structure, crack the hull in ways we can't patch mid-fight. Better than dying. Slowly to 1,000 cuts, she replied, already moving to help haul the crates. They worked fast, a symphony of urgency. Marcus dragging the heavy containers into position while Javier wired the detonators with precise, steady hands. Elena monitoring the internal camera feeds, watching as Krath shadows crept closer through the vents and corridors. Sweat stung her eyes, but their movements synced in perfect rhythm, human grit transforming desperation into a makeshift weapon. The first charge armed with a soft, ominous beep, its indicator light glowing green. Outside, the enemy fleet loomed, larger on the external scans, a testament to broken diplomatic talks now etched in steel and plasma fire. But they weren't done fighting yet. Humanity's legacy was forged in such moments, not surrendered to alien aggression. Elena wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her gloved hand, the steady hum of the detonators echoing in the cramped confines of the engineering bay like an artificial heartbeat. Underscoring the tension that gripped the air, Javier's fingers danced over the wiring one final time, splicing the last connection with a precision that belied the slight tremor in his voice, born of exhaustion and fear. Charges are all set now, he announced, stepping back to admire his handiwork. Remote triggers linked directly to the bridge console, or whatever's left of it. We hit the button when they're clustered on the hull. The timing has to be perfect to maximize the shakeoff without ripping ourselves apart. Marcus grunted. As he sealed the final access panel, his broad shoulders heaving from the physical strain of hauling the crates into position. How many more of those bugs are we expecting? The feeds are showing at least a dozen exosuits clinging to the outer plating like barnacles, probing for weak spots. More than that, unfortunately, Elena said, pulling up the external scan on her portable tablet, the holographic display casting a ghostly blue light across her face. The Krath boarding pods were multiplying on the scans, sleek black orbs latching onto the Vanguard's underbelly with magnetic grips, disgorging more warriors into the fray. Their legacy of aggression stretched back centuries. Council edicts, repeatedly ignored, territorial grabs justified as natural rights, now paid for in blood, breach alarms, and the desperate defense of a lone human ship. But humans didn't fold under pressure. They adapted. They endured. She keyed the internal comm system, her voice broadcasting ship-wide with calm authority. All hands, this is the captain. Brace for a shakedown maneuver. Engineering's preparing a surprise for our uninvited guests. Strap in tight and secure loose gear. It's going to get rough. From the corridors beyond came the hurried clatter of boots on grating and muffled acknowledgments from the scattered crew members still at their posts. Javier shot her a sidelong, Look, his cautious nature surfacing in the furrow of his brow. This could vent half our atmosphere if the hull buckles under the blasts, Captain. We're gambling with the entire ship's integrity here. No second chances. Better to gamble than to gift-wrap ourselves for the Dominion, she replied, her voice steady despite the knot of tension in her gut. Elena had always been the brave one, the commander who pushed forward when retreat meant surrender or worse. Back on the Mars colony during her early service, she'd jury-rigged a failing life support system amid raging dust storms, saving her entire squad from suffocation. This crisis was on a grander scale, but the principle remained the same. Act decisively or die waiting for the inevitable. The first wave of additional boarders hit the outer locks with a metallic screech that vibrated through the deck plates, sending a shiver up Elena's spine. Alarms wailed in response. Breach confirmed in Sector 7, intruder icons swarming across the internal schematics like a digital plague. They're inside the main structure now, Marcus barked, snatching a pulse rifle from the nearby weapons rack. His usual witty edge had vanished entirely, replaced by the grim focus of a man who had lost too many operations to half measures and bad luck. I'll hold the inner bulkhead here. That'll buy you time to arm the rest of the charges and get into position. No heroics, Marcus, Elena ordered sharply, her eyes locking onto his. Fall back to the bay once you've slowed them. We detonate together. No one gets left behind. He nodded curtly, vanishing into the corridor with his rifle raised and ready. Gunfire echoed back seconds later, sharp staccato bursts cutting through the engineering din like punctuation marks in a sentence of defiance. Javier finished the final arming sequence on the control panel, the interface beeping green in confirmation. All set across the board, but if we mistime the detonation even by a few seconds. We won't, Elena cut him off, striding to the central control station where the trigger interface awaited. Her fingers hovered over the activation key, the scan, feed showing the Krath massing outside on the hull, their exosuits probing relentlessly for additional weak points to exploit. One wrong move now, and the Vanguard would crack open like an eggshell under the strain. A sudden explosion rocked the ship from the forward sections, another boarding pod slamming home with brutal force. Shouts crackled over the comms from the forward crew. They're through. Sector 5 is compromised, falling back. Elena's heart pounded against her ribs like a war drum. The plan was solid on paper, but reality had teeth, sharp and unrelenting. She slammed her palm down on the trigger without another moment's hesitation. The hull shuddered violently as the mining charges bloomed in a carefully sequenced chain, muffled thunder rippling across the ship's skin like a seismic wave. On the external feed, Krath exosuits erupted in flashes of debris and fire, tumbling helplessly into the void like shattered insects caught in a gale. Alarms screamed in the engineering bay, structural integrity holding at 72%, but dropping fast as microstresses propagated through the frame. Javier let out a whoop despite the gravity of the moment, pumping a fist in fleeting triumph. Got him good. Half the boarders are space dust now, scattered across the debris field. But the victory soured almost immediately. A secondary alert flashed across the consoles. Microfractures spiderwebbing across the aft hull sections, atmosphere hissing from a dozen failing seals. The scans picked up survivors. Stubborn Krath warriors clinging deeper to the frame, their claws digging into the metal like anchors, adapting to the setback with hive-like resilience. They're adapting already, Elena muttered, her fingers recalibrating the sensors to track the remnants. The Krath weren't mindless drones. Council histories described them as relentless tacticians, always one step ahead in the ancient wars that had nearly consumed the galaxy. Now, they burrowed like parasites, seeking to cripple the ship from within. Marcus burst back into the engineering bay moments later, his rifle barrel still smoking from recent exchanges, a fresh gash across his arm oozing blood through a torn sleeve. Pushed them back from the bulkhead, but they're rerouting through the maintenance vents now. We need to seal those ducts or they'll flank us from every angle. Elena nodded, her mind already racing ahead to the next phase. The mining charges had bought them precious time, but the cost was mounting. Power fluctuations rippling through the systems, lights failing in intermittent bursts. Human grit had shaken the board, but the game of survival was far from over. She grabbed a welder from the toolkit rack, its handle warm from recent use. Javier, reroute emergency power to the bulkhead reinforcements. Lock them down tight. Marcus, cover the vents. Pick off anything that tries to crawl through. We're turning this ship into a fortress, section by section. As they moved to their tasks, the Vanguard groaned under the ongoing strain, a wounded beast fighting for every breath amid the circling predators outside. The enemy fleet pressed closer, their legacy of conquest hungry for the final blow. But Elena's eyes burned with unquenchable defiance. They had started this aggression. Humans would ensure it ended on their terms, one improvised defense at a time. Javier's fingers flew across the engineering console, sweat beading on his brow as he punched in the reroute commands with frantic precision. The Vanguard's emergency power systems hummed to life in response. A low, resonant growl vibrating through the bulkheads and into their bones, signaling the shift of resources to critical defenses. But the power fluctuations hit harder now, the ship's systems protesting the strain. Lights flickered like dying stars overhead, casting jagged, erratic shadows across the engineering bay that made every corner seem alive with threat. Power's stabilizing the forward sections at least, Javier called out, his voice steady despite the visible strain etching lines into his face. But the aft generators are spiking dangerously. If we push too much more power through them, we risk a full cascade shutdown. Everything goes dark. Elena welded the first duct seal with quick, precise bursts of the torch, the acrid smell of molten metal filling the air and mingling with the ozone tang of overloaded circuits. Sparks danced around her like fireflies in a storm, briefly illuminating the gash on her forearm that she'd ignored since the initial breach in the cargo bay. A shallow cut, but stinging now under the heat. Marcus crouched nearby, his rifle trained unwaveringly on the nearest vent grate, his eyes narrowed in concentration. A faint scrabbling echoed from within the ductwork, the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against durasteel plating. "They're close," Marcus muttered, adjusting his aim with minute precision. "Sounds like a full squad in there testing the seals. If we don't lock this one down soon, they'll pivot to the next vent and come at us from behind." She nodded, wiping her face with the back of her gloved hand, smearing grime across her cheek. The plan was straightforward in theory. Fortify the key choke points throughout the ship, buy enough time for the defenses to recharge and for Lila to complete the jump drive repairs. But nothing felt simple anymore, not with the enemy adapting at every turn. The Krath, those sleek, relentless invaders from the outer rims of the Galactic Council's influence, had anticipated human tactics faster than expected. Their boarding pods had punched through the hull like hypodermic needles, and now their ground teams slithered through the shadows of the maintenance shafts, exploiting every overlooked vulnerability. A sharp clang reverberated from the vent ahead, the grating buckling slightly under pressure. Marcus fired without hesitation, the shot's report echoing like thunder in the confined space. Something screeched in response from within the duct, a high-pitched wail that was cut short abruptly. Black ichor splattered against the inner side of the grate, seeping through the mesh. "One down," he said, reloading the rifle with practiced efficiency, the magazine clicking home smoothly. "But that's not going to stop the rest, they'll just send more." Elena finished the weld, the metal glowing cherry red before cooling to a dull, seamless seam that blended with the surrounding plating. "Javier, status on the bulkheads? Can we lock them down yet?" "Shields are holding at 40% across the critical zones," he replied without looking up from his console, his attention fixed on the scrolling diagnostics. "I can initiate a full lockdown now, but it'll drain the auxiliary batteries dry. No margin for error after that. We'll be running on fumes." "Do it," she commanded, already moving to the next duct with her welder at the ready. Her boots thudded against the deck as the ship shuddered again, a distant explosion rumbling through the corridors from another external hit by the Krath fleet. Every second they delayed was a second closer to being overwhelmed. As Javier initiated the lockdown sequence, a fresh wave of alarms blared to life. A new breach alert flashing red across the main console, urgent and unyielding. "Elena, they've punched through into engineering proper," Javier said, his voice laced with alarm. "Small team, but they're cutting straight for the core systems, the reactors and drive plasma lines." Her stomach tightened into a cold knot. Engineering was the beating heart of the Vanguard, where the raw power of the fusion reactors flowed to every system. If the Krath sabotaged it, the ship would go dark. easy prey for the encircling fleet outside, adrift and defenseless. "Marcus, hold your position here," she ordered, grabbing a plasma cutter from the wall mount. "Javier, you're with me. We reroute through the maintenance shafts to cut them off before they reach the core." Marcus glanced back over his shoulder, his face grim under the helmet's harsh light. "You two go ahead. I'll buy you as much time as I can from this end." "No heroics," she warned, her tone brooking no argument as she checked the cutter's charge. "We all come back from this intact." He smirked faintly, the ghost of his wit flickering through the tension. Says the one charging headlong into the dark, "Just don't make me come after you." They slipped into the maintenance shaft, the narrow crawl space pressing close around them like a coffin, the walls slick with condensation and grime. Elena led the way, her helmet light beam cutting through the gloom in a narrow cone, illuminating tangled pipes and wiring bundles overhead. Pipes hissed faintly with escaping steam, and cold drips fell like sweat from the ceiling, pattering against her suit. Javier followed close behind, his toolkit slung over one shoulder like a lifeline, his breaths coming in measured, controlled bursts to conserve oxygen. Halfway down the shaft, the entire structure trembled violently, a deep vibration that set their teeth on edge. The vent panel ahead buckled inward with a groan of stressed metal, and two Krath forms spilled out into the shaft, tall, chitin-armored figures with multi-jointed limbs and glowing visor eyes that scanned the darkness. They moved like apex predators, their energy blades humming to life with a low, menacing whine. Elena reacted on instinct, igniting the plasma cutter and slashing at the nearest one. The blue hot blade bit into its armor, sparking violently but not penetrating fully through the reinforced chitin. The creature lunged in retaliation, its claw raking the air mere inches from her shoulder, the whoosh of displaced air brushing her helmet. Javier dropped back a step, pulling a stun grenade from his belt with a swift motion. "Cover your eyes!" She rolled aside as he lobbed it forward. The blast filled the shaft with blinding white light and a deafening crack that reverberated off the walls, the shockwave buffeting them like a physical force. The Krath staggered, their visors cracking under the EMP surge, but one shook off the disorientation faster than the other, charging forward with unnatural speed, its blade raised high. Elena met it head-on, driving the cutter's tip into its jointed leg with a grunt of effort. The armor gave way at the weak point, the limb buckling with a hiss of escaping gases as the alien collapsed. Javier finished it off with a precise shot from his sidearm, the round punching through the weakened visor in a spray of shattered components. Panting heavily, Elena turned to check on him, her light sweeping over his form. "You good? That was too close." "Bruised but still breathing," he replied, nodding towards the buckled panel. They were heading straight for the plasma relays. Another minute and they'd have had us. Too close by far. They pressed on through the shaft, the narrow passage eventually opening into the underbelly of engineering proper. Consoles sparked erratically here, warning lights pulsing in rhythmic urgency, and the massive central core loomed ahead, a towering cylinder thrumming with barely contained fury, its surface etched with glowing conduits. But harsh clicking voices echoed from the chamber ahead, the alien tongue unmistakable. 3 more Krath clustered around an access terminal, their tools interfacing directly with the ship's systems, tendrils of cabling snaking from their gauntlets into the ports. One turned sharply, its visor locking onto them with a predatory gleam. "Contact," Elena whispered urgently, signaling Javier with a hand gesture to hold position. He scanned the room quickly, his engineer's eye landing on a loose coolant line snaking from the wall, its valves within reach. The cryogas valves. If I vent that, it'll freeze their suit solid in seconds. But it'll fog the entire area. We'll be shooting blind too. She weighed the risks in an instant, no time for perfection in the heat of battle. "Do it. I'll flank them through the shadows." Javier twisted the valve with a grunt, the hiss building rapidly to a roar as pressurized gas escaped. White mist exploded into the chamber like a sudden storm, billowing thick and disorienting, rimming the Krath armor with frost almost immediately. Their chittering turned to alarmed hisses, movement slowing as the extreme cold seeped through their environmental seals. Elena darted forward through the haze, keeping low with the cutter held ready. She struck the first Krath at the knee joint, the blade slicing clean and toppling it with a crash. The second swung blindly through the fog, its energy blade whistling past her head. But she ducked under it and came up slashing, severing its blade arm at the elbow in a shower of sparks and ichor. Javier's shots rang out from the mist, muffled but precise. 2 clean hits that dropped his targets. But the third Krath broke free of the Frost's grip, lunging at Javier with ferocious speed. It pinned him against a nearby console, claws digging into his suit as it sought to crush the life from him. He grunted in pain, slamming his toolkit into its faceplate with desperate force, buying a moment. Elena tackled it from behind, the cutter's heat melting through the ice-sheathed backplating in a sizzle of superheated vapor. The creature spasmed violently and fell still, slumping to the deck in a heap of twitching limbs. The mist cleared slowly, revealing the aftermath. The terminal half-wired with Krath sabotage tools, but their work incomplete. The core system spared. Javier slumped against the console, clutching his side where a claw had grazed through the suit, blood seeping through the fabric in dark rivulets. "Relays are intact," he managed, his voice strained through gritted teeth. Elena wiped the sweat from her brow, the cutter's glow fading as she knelt beside him, her hands already reaching for the medkit on his belt. His face was pale beneath the helmet's visor, but he managed a grim nod of determination. "Relays intact," he repeated, wincing as she peeled back the torn fabric. "We can still reroute the power grid from here. But that graze, it's deeper than it looks. Whatever alloy their claws are made of resists standard punctures." She glanced at the wound, the jagged tear weeping steadily, the suit's emergency sealant foam bubbling futilely against the flow. The Krath's weaponry was no joke. Their biotech alloys were designed to punch through defenses and linger. "Hold still. I've got a patch kit. Nanosealant should hold it." Her fingers worked quickly, applying a fresh layer of emergency gel that hissed on contact with the blood, forming a temporary bond. It wasn't a perfect fix. Nothing was out here on the fringe of civilized space, far from a proper medbay, but it would buy him time to keep moving. The air recyclers hummed louder now, struggling to pull in and filter the acrid scent of scorched metal, alien ichor, and the chemical tang of the cryogas residue. From the shadows of the corridor beyond, Marcus's voice crackled over the internal comms link, urgent and edged with strain. "Status report. I've got eyes on the outer hatch from here. More of those bugs inbound, 3 or 4 at least. You two clear the terminal yet, or do I need to come down there?" "Not yet," Elena shot back, helping Javier to his feet with a firm grip under his arm. He leaned on her heavily, the toolkit slung over his shoulder like an anchor, but his steps were steadying. "We're rerouting the power now to lock them out. Cover us if they breach your position. Don't let them through." Javier shuffled forward despite the pain, ignoring the wet pull at his side as he jacked his diagnostic tool into the panel with a practiced twist. Lines of code scrolled across his wrist-mounted display, the interface responding sluggishly to his commands. "Power surge incoming to the outer clamps. If we flip this relay, it'll overload their docking mechanisms. Strand the bastards out there while we slip away clean." The Vanguard shuddered again with a distant clang that echoed through the vents. The sound of metal protesting under assault. Marcus's breath came quick over the comms, laced with the sharp reports of his rifle in the background. "They're cutting through with torches now." I can hear the whine moving fast. "Hold whatever ground you've got." Elena's pulse quickened, adrenaline sharpening her focus as she grabbed a loose conduit from the floor, twisting it into place under Javier's directions. Sparks flew from the connection, briefly illuminating the frost-rimed walls where the cryogas had backfired during the fight, leaving crystalline patterns like fractured glass. One wrong move here and the entire power grid could fry, plunging them into darkness. "Almost there," Javier muttered, his fingers hovering over the execute key. A screech pierced the comms, metal tearing under the Krath's tools. Marcus fired first, the muffled bursts of his rifle buying them precious seconds. 2 down. But the third one's wedged the hatch open. It's squeezing through. Javier hit the execute key with finality. The overhead light surged brightly for a moment, then dimmed to a predatory red as power shifted. Alarms wailed in protest, but the terminal beeped confirmation. The outer clamps engaged, locking the Krath ships in place. Outside, the enemy vessel groaned in mechanical agony, its engines whining futilely against the unyielding grip. Elena pulled Javier towards the side passage leading back to the main bay, his weight dragging on her as they moved. "Marcus, fall back. We're relocating, now!" He appeared at the corridor's end moments later, rifle still smoking from the exchange, his face streaked with grime and sweat. "That bought us, 10 minutes tops? Their reinforcements will punch through the locks eventually." Better than zero, Javier coughed, pressing a hand to his wound as they pressed on. The gel held, staunching the flow, but his steps faltered slightly on the uneven deck. They twisted through the labyrinthine halls towards the auxiliary bay, where the shuttle waited as their last-ditch escape. Ice crunched underfoot, remnants of the cryogas skirmish, and Elena's mind raced ahead, piecing together the next moves. The Council had built outposts like this one in the system's fringes to hoard relics, ancient human artifacts from the old interstellar wars, technologies the Krath and their allies coveted for their own expansion. But true legacy wasn't buried in dusty vaults. It was in what they did with it now, turning desperation into defiance. In the auxiliary bay, their shuttle sat ready, its ramp half lowered in anticipation. Marcus sealed the inner door behind them with a resounding clang that felt final, echoing in the chamber. "Engines hot and primed," he confirmed, glancing at Javier. "But you're in no shape to sit this one out. You good to fly?" Javier slid into the pilot's seat with a grimace, his fingers already dancing over the controls despite the tremor in his arm from the wound. "Good enough to get us clear. Strap in. It's going to be a rough launch." The deck vibrated as the shuttle's thrusters spooled up, a deep rumble building. Through the viewport, shadows shifted on the hull outside, Krath claws scraping at the frozen plating seeking entry. Elena monitored the scans from the co-pilot's station, her plasma cutter at the ready on her lap. "They're adapting fast. Already jamming the clamps, won't hold them forever." "Then we adapt faster," Javier replied, punching the throttle forward. The shuttle lurched free with a groan of shearing metal, the restraints snapping as they broke away from the Vanguard's bay. Hull plating protested, but they cleared, stars blurring into streaks on the viewscreen as the mothership shrank to a glinting speck amid the asteroid field. But as they accelerated into the void, a new alert pinged on the navigation display. Pursuit signatures lighting up the scanners, the Krath interceptors undeterred and closing. Javier's bloodied hand tightened on the yoke, his resolve unbroken. They started this mess with their Council defiance. "We're finishing it our way, no surrender." Javier wrenched the shuttle into a tight spiral, the inertial dampeners whining in protest as G-forces pressed them back into their seats like an invisible hand. Alarms blared relentlessly, proximity warnings from the 3 Krath interceptors closing fast, their sleek, angular forms darting through the asteroid field's shadows like predators weaving through a coral reef. Patient and lethal. "They're matching our vector perfectly," Elena said, her voice steady but edged with the strain of split-second calculations as she swiped through the holographic readouts on her console. She traced the pursuers' energy signatures, noting their superior acceleration curves. "And they're faster than us, too. Those interceptors are built for this exact scenario. Short, high-intensity bursts designed for precision kills in confined spaces like this field." Javier didn't tear his gaze from the viewport, his jaw set in determination as he keyed in a sequence of evasive maneuvers, pulling archived data from the shuttle's battered navigation core to inform his path. "We'll turn their speed against them. Plot a slingshot trajectory around that big rock ahead, the one with the dense debris ring orbiting it. The gravity well will give us a boost they won't expect." Elena's fingers flew across her controls, confirming the trajectory and running quick simulations. "It's risky, Javier. The field's too dense in spots, any collision could shred our hull like paper. But if it works..." She locked it in, her eyes narrowing on the scan as the lead interceptor fired a warning pulse. A shimmering net of contained plasma that grazed their aft shielding, sparking across the hull in a cascade of electrical discharge. The shuttle bucked hard from the near miss, interior lights flickering as secondary systems strained. Javier grunted, wrestling the controls to maintain their course as they hurtled towards the colossal gray asteroid, its pockmarked surface looming larger by the second, craters like yawning voids. "Hold on tight," he warned, his voice tight with focus. "This is where human grit shines. We don't have their tech, but we've got ingenuity." Elena braced herself against the co-pilot's harness, the plasma cutter humming faintly in her lap, but she trusted his call implicitly. Javier's instincts had pulled them through tight spots before. The asteroid filled the viewport entirely now, a barren behemoth tumbling slowly through space, and Javier timed the main burn to perfection, the engines flaring hot as they skimmed the gravity well's edge. The shuttle whipped around the curve in a blaze of acceleration, slingshotting outward with renewed velocity that pressed them deeper into their seats. Behind them, the interceptors followed doggedly, but the debris ring struck like a cosmic storm. chunks of ice and jagged metal pinging off their hulls in a hail of impacts. The lead Krath ship veered too sharply in pursuit, clipping a large fragment that sent it into an uncontrolled spin, slamming into a larger boulder with catastrophic force. Explosive decompression bloomed silently in the vacuum, wreckage scattering like confetti across the field. "Got one," Javier muttered, a grim smile cracking his blood-streaked face for the first time since the escape. But the other two adapted swiftly, peeling off to flank them from opposite vectors, their weapons charging with a telltale blue glow visible even through the viewport. Elena's scan pinged with urgent red warnings. "They're coordinating a pincer maneuver, trapping us between them. We can't outrun this configuration. Their formation is too tight." Javier scanned the field ahead, his mind racing through a mental library of old spacer tales, academy simulations, and desperate improvisations from past missions. The shuttle's cargo bay still held those emergency mining charges salvaged from the Vanguard. Crude explosives, but potent in the right hands. "Rig the external launchers," he decided. "We'll seed our path with them. Turn this chase into their graveyard. Detonate when they're in the blast radius." She nodded, unstrapping quickly to access the auxiliary console, her hands moving with the precision of someone who had patched hulls under fire more times than she cared to count. "On it. But if we mistime the detonation sequence..." She trailed off, loading the arming codes into the system without needing to finish the thought. As the interceptors closed the gap, Javier jinked the shuttle hard to port, drawing a barrage of fire that scorched their side, the heat blooming through the hull. The shuttle shuddered violently, a panel in the cabin sparking and smoking, but he held the course steady, weaving through the debris. Elena triggered the first charge, ejecting it into their wake like a breadcrumb trailing behind. "Armed and deployed. 30 seconds to optimal spread, keep them following." The Krath fired again, a lance of energy slicing close enough to melt a section of the viewport seal, frost blooming instantly on the glass from the sudden micro-breach in pressure. Javier sealed it hastily with a quick patch kit from under the console, sweat beading on his brow as he fought the controls. "Come on, you bastards, follow the bait right into it." The pursuers dove in eagerly, their sensors likely locked onto the shuttle's heat signature amid the cold void. Elena hit the remote detonate as they passed the charge's bloom point, a chain of micro-explosions ripping through the space behind them, shrapnel expanding into a deadly cloud that caught the trailing interceptor dead center. Its hull crumpled inward, engines erupting in a silent fireball before the ship went dark, drifting lifelessly. One left now. The final Krath interceptor twisted wildly to evade the debris field, but it was closer than ever, dangerously so. Its boarding clamps extended like mechanical talons, reaching out to snag the fleeing shuttle. Javier rolled the craft inverted in a desperate bid for seconds, the stars wheeling overhead. "Elena, options on that last one? We can't shake it loose at this range." She glanced up from her console, the plasma cutter in hand, her face pale but resolute under the strain. "We could vent the cargo bay, use the outgassing to push them off course. The sudden thrust would yaw us hard, but it'd cost us maneuverability. We'd be drifting for a bit after." "Do it," Javier said without hesitation, trusting her calculations and the instincts honed from years dodging corporate enforcers on the fringe worlds. He knew her math was sound. Hesitation now meant capture. Elena punched the command into the system, and the shuttle's bay doors cracked open remotely, spewing a massive plume of frozen air and loose cargo into the vacuum. The explosive decompression provided an unexpected thrust, yawing the shuttle hard to the right and throwing the pursuing interceptor off its clamp trajectory. It overshot wildly, slamming into a stray asteroid fragment instead, its frame buckling under the high-speed impact with a final, silent crumple. The chase stuttered to a halt at last. Javier eased back on the throttle, scanning the readouts for any lingering signatures. Clear, for the moment. The shuttle limped onward through the void, its systems strained to the limit, the faint hiss from the patched viewport the only sound besides their ragged breathing. Elena slumped back into her seat, wiping sweat from her eyes with a trembling hand. That was too close. The Council's got more hunters out there, combing the system for stragglers like us. We can't afford another engagement like that. Javier nodded, his grip easing on the yoke as the immediate threat receded. Let them come. We just bought ourselves a head start, enough to reach the outer rim and regroup. The stars stretched out ahead, unyielding and infinite, but they pressed on, two humans against the vast, uncaring void, unbroken and defiant. Javier's hands steadied on the controls as the shuttle's engines hummed back to life. The makeshift patch on the hull holding firm against the relentless pull of vacuum, Elena leaned forward in her seat, her fingers flying over the diagnostic panel, coaxing green status lights to flicker back online one by one as she ran system checks. Propulsion stabilized at 60%, she reported, her voice tight but even, betraying none of the exhaustion creeping in. We can't push her any harder without risking another hull breach. The stresses from that last maneuver were brutal. He glanced at the navigation screen, the plotted course arcing gracefully towards the outer rim of the system's sprawling debris field, a vast graveyard of shattered moons, derelict probes, and cosmic flotsam that might provide the cover they needed to evade further pursuit. The Krath hunters were relentless, their interceptors designed for precision strikes in open space, not the brutal seat-of-the-pants improvisation that humans excelled at under pressure. We'll use the rocks for concealment, Javier replied, banking the shuttle gently to skirt a tumbling boulder the size of a small freighter, its surface pitted and scarred from eons of impacts, slingshot through the denser parts of the field. If they follow too closely, it'll be their funeral. The debris will do half our work for us. The shuttle shuddered as they entered the outer edges of the debris cloud, fragments pinging off the reinforced plating like relentless hail on thin tin. Elena strapped herself in tighter, her mind racing through contingencies. Power allocation, weapon reserves, potential landing sites if the engines gave out. She'd always been the cautious one, the engineer who double-checked every weld and seal before committing, while Javier charged ahead with that unbreakable optimism that bordered on recklessness. Now with the Krath's edict echoing in every intercepted transmission, surrender the ship and data or be erased from the stars, optimism felt like the sharpest weapon in their arsenal. A proximity alert blared suddenly, red strobes painting the cramped cabin in bloody hues that matched the urgency of the moment. It wasn't a stray rock this time. Javier twisted the yoke sharply, evading a shadow that resolved into another Krath interceptor emerging from the nebula's heart, its angular hull glinting ominously under the distant light of the system's sun. Flanking us from starboard, Elena called out, already priming the jury-rigged countermeasures, a hasty mix of chaff dispensers and overloaded signal flares cobbled together from spare parts in the cargo hold. The alien ship fired without warning, a lance of plasma searing past close enough to heat the viewport's exterior, the cabin temperature spiking briefly. Javier rolled the shuttle into a defensive spin, using a nearby cluster of debris as an improvised shield. A large chunk of ice vaporized in the plasma's wake, spraying crystalline shards that sparkled like fleeting stars against the black. "They're hurting us," he growled, sweat beading anew on his brow as he adjusted course, pushing towards the open void where they can bring their full firepower to bear. Elena's plan formed in an instant, born of desperation and the innate human knack for turning trash into treasure. The cargo bay, dump the auxiliary fuel tanks. It'll create a massive vapor cloud to blind their sensors and disrupt targeting. Javier hesitated for only a split second, fully aware that it meant sacrificing their emergency fuel reserves, leaving no buffer for a quick jump to the nearest relay point, but he nodded sharply, slapping the release controls. The shuttle groaned as the pressurized tanks ejected into space, blooming into a nebula of frozen propellant that engulfed the pursuing interceptor in a swirling mist. The Krath ship veered, wildly, its weapons firing blindly into the interference, lances of energy dissipating harmlessly in the cloud. Javier seized the opening, accelerating through a narrow gap between spinning wreckage, the shuttle's frame creaking metallically under the strain of the tight maneuver. Elena monitored the alien signature fading behind the vapor interference on her scans. "It's buying us time, but not much. Fuel reserves are down to critical levels now. One more extended burn and we're adrift." As they broke free of the debris field, the stars sharpened into crisp focus once more, the system's massive gas giant, looming on the horizon like a banded marble swirled with storms. Javier set a course for its thin rings, delicate bands of dust and ice that could scatter pursuit signals and provide additional cover. But the cost gnawed at him inwardly. The lost tanks meant no margin for error, no fallback if they encountered another patrol. One more chase like the last and escape would become impossible. Elena placed a steady hand on his shoulder, her touch grounding amid the adrenaline. We adapt. That's what we do best. Turn the impossible into just another problem to solve. The gas giant swelled in the viewport, its storm swirling in silent, majestic fury, a stark reminder that the void cared nothing for empires or edicts. Only survival mattered, raw and unyielding. Deeper into the rings they plunged, the shuttle, weaving through particulate storms that rattled the hull like gravel in a drum. Sensors screaming overload warnings with every pass. Javier kept them steady, his eyes locked on the faint beacon of an abandoned mining outpost ahead. Their last hope for repairs and resupply, a relic from humanity's early expansion into the system. If the Krath found it first, however, it would become a death trap, another layer in their relentless hunt. A new contact pinged on the scanners. Not one ship, but two Krath interceptors converging from the giant's shadow, their signatures flaring like predators scenting blood. Elena cursed under her breath, rerouting what scant power remained to the shields. They're coordinating vectors, closing from multiple angles. We can't outrun this, they're boxing us in. Javier's jaw set firm, that gritty resolve surfacing like a blade drawn in the dark. Then we don't run. We fight smart, make them regret the chase. He diverted auxiliary power to the forward arrays, transforming the shuttle's weak tractor beam into an improvised grapnel launcher. As the lead interceptor closed to weapons range, he fired it, not to capture, but to snag a massive ring fragment, a slab of ice the size of a shuttle, and hurl it forward like a battering ram. The alien ship dodged with agile grace, but the second couldn't react in time, the impact crumpling its nose cone in a burst of escaping atmosphere and debris. Wreckage trailed in its wake, a momentary victory that tasted bittersweet, like ash on the tongue. The surviving hunter adapted instantly, launching a spread of drones that swarmed towards them like angry hornets, their tiny forms bristling with micro-missiles. Elena took over the turret controls, her shots precise and economical, picking off the closest threats with bursts from the salvaged railgun mounted in the dorsal turret. One drone exploded in a shower of sparks. Another grazed the wing assembly, shearing off a secondary sensor array in a spray of fragments. The shuttle bucked from the hit, alarms wailing in cacophony, but they pressed on relentlessly, the outposts, silhouette emerging from the haze of the rings like a promise of sanctuary. Docking clamps engaged with a solid thud that vibrated through the entire frame, locking them to the derelict station. Javier killed the engines with a final sigh, the sudden silence heavy and oppressive. Inside now. We fortify and patch what we can. Can't stay long. The airlock cycled with a hiss, spilling them into the derelict mining outpost. Dusty corridors lit by flickering emergency strips, the echoes of long-abandoned drills and machinery haunting the stale air. Elena sealed the hatch behind them, with a decisive clang, her breath coming in ragged bursts as she scanned for immediate threats. Scans show no life signs, but the Krath are close. I can feel it in the vibrations. We need to patch the shuttle and ghost out before they breach the perimeter. Javier scavenged a toolkit from a rusted locker nearby, his mind already mapping out defensive positions and repair priorities. Humans had built this outpost layer by layer, a bulwark against the uncaring dark of space. Now it would serve as their shield one last time. But as distant thrums began to vibrate the walls, subtle at first, like the approach of thunder, he knew the real fight was only just beginning, the outpost's fragile sanctuary already under siege. They worked in tandem through the outpost's echoing bays, Elena welding fresh plates over the shuttle's breaches with focused bursts of her torch, the blue flame casting long shadows across the grimy floors. Javier rigged motion sensors from scrap wire and salvaged components, stringing them across the access points like a web of warnings, each one beeping softly as it came online. Under Elena's coaxing, the outpost's core reactor flickered back to life with a reluctant hum, bathing the docking bay in harsh, unfiltered light that revealed the extent of the decay. Rusted conduits dangling like veins, faded schematics of long-lost mining operations peeling from the walls. "Power's stable for now," she said, wiping grime from her face with a forearm, leaving a streak of oil behind. "But running the reactor will draw them like moths to a flame. the energy signatures too bright to hide. Let it, Javier replied, his voice cutting through the hum of the awakening systems, steady as the pulse in his veins. We've got traps waiting in the corridors. They'll walk right into our welcome if they try to board. Elena shot him a quick glance, the welder's torch casting flickering shadows across her determined features, highlighting the lines of fatigue etched there. She was the cautious one by nature, always calculating the angles and risks before committing, but Javier's unyielding grit had pulled them through worse scrapes than this. The outpost's corridors stretched out like forgotten veins through the rock lined with relics of human expansion, rusted conduits snaking along the walls, faded holographic schematics depicting stars and resource veins that humanity had once boldly claimed. Now those same halls would become their gauntlet, a maze turned to their advantage. They moved deeper into the structure, their boots echoing softly against the grated floors, the sound swallowed by the vast emptiness. Javier led the way, his toolkit slung over one shoulder as he rigged additional charges from salvaged plasma cells, scavenged from the outpost's emergency stores. Elena followed close, her scanner beeping intermittent warnings of approaching signatures on the long-range feeds. The Krath were methodical hunters, their ships a distant swarm on the horizon sensors, but these new vibrations humming through. The walls meant boots or claws on the ground probing the outpost's defenses. 2 contacts vectoring in from the east airlock, Elena whispered, her breath fogging the scanner's display briefly in the chill. They're probing, not charging full tilt. Smart, testing for traps before committing. Javier nodded, kneeling, to splice a wire into an old security grid panel, sparks dancing like fireflies in the dim light. Then we make them regret every step. Reroute power to the bulkheads, set them to collapse the junction if they push too hard. She worked the adjacent panel, her fingers flying across the controls with efficient grace. The air grew thicker, laced with the sharp ozone tang of failing environmental seals, straining against the influx of activity. Outside, the asteroid's surface churned under relentless particle storms, but here inside, the real storm brewed in tense silence, waiting to erupt. A low groan rippled through the walls, and Elena froze mid-command, her hand hovering over the interface. They're cutting through the outer hatch, she said, her voice tight with urgency. Javier sealed the splice with a final twist and stood, grabbing a makeshift stun baton from his belt, its tip crackling faintly with stored energy. Positions. You take the overlook on the catwalk. I'll draw them into the open. Their eyes met for a beat, brave, unyielding resolve passing between them like a shared vow. Then she climbed the ladder to the elevated catwalk, vanishing into the gloom above with her rifle slung ready. Javier positioned himself at the corridor's sharp bend, his heart steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. Humans hadn't conquered the stars through fear or surrender. They did it with plans that bent under pressure but never truly broke, adapting until victory emerged from chaos. The breach came with a hiss of equalizing pressure, the outer hatch yielding to the Krath's tools. 2 figures emerged into the corridor, sleek in their iridescent armor that shifted colors to blend with the shadows, energy lances humming with contained power in their multi-jointed grips, council enforcers, their forms elongated and alien, eyes glowing with augmented scans that swept the space methodically. They advanced in perfect sync, one sweeping ahead for traps with a probing sensor tendril, the other covering with its lance at the ready. Javier stepped into the faint light spilling from an overhead panel, baton raised in challenge. "Welcome to humanity's edge," he said, his voice echoing slightly. "Hope you brought your own coffins. This rock's got no vacancies." The lead enforcer tilted its head curiously, its voice modulator crackling to life in clipped synthesized universal. "Surrender the core data primitives. Your legacy of interference ends here, in the dust of forgotten claims." Javier grinned fiercely, thumbing the baton's trigger to arc blue energy along its length. The fight erupted in an instant, sharp, dodges and parries, grunts of effort mingling with the hum of clashing weapons. He feinted left, drawing the second enforcer into the fray, their movements precise but ultimately predictable in their rigid patterns. Elena's voice crackled over the comms from her vantage. "Charges armed and ready. Say the word, and I drop the junction on them." "Not yet," he gasped, parrying a thrust from the lead enforcer that singed the edge of his sleeve, pain flaring hot and insistent along his arm. But he pressed the attack, using the corridor's narrow confines to limit their mobility, where their superior reach became a liability. The lead enforcer lunged suddenly, its lance piercing Javier's shoulder guard with a sizzle of burned fabric and flesh. He staggered, blood warm against his skin, but twisted through the pain, slamming the baton into its jointed elbow. A crackle of electricity surged, eliciting a spasm. The alien jerked back, its armor smoking from the overload. "Now!" Javier roared into the comms. Elena triggered the charges without delay. The bulkheads groaned like living things, slamming down like iron jaws to seal the trap. The second enforcer twisted mid-stride, caught in the collapsing junction, its mechanical cry cut short by the crush of unyielding metal. The lead one whirled towards Javier, but he was already on it, driving the baton home into its chest plate with both hands. Sparks flew in a brilliant shower. The enforcer slumped to the deck, systems fried and limbs twitching in final spasms. Panting heavily, Javier slumped against the wall for support, Elena dropping down from the catwalk to land beside him. She pressed a sealant patch to his new shoulder wound, her touch firm and efficient. One squad down, but the swarm's inbound now. That little flare from the reactor, it's turned us into a beacon. He winced at the sting of the patch, but his eyes burned with defiance. Good. Let them come all at once. We've got more traps where that came from, the outpost's just getting started. The outpost thrummed alive around them, a defiant heartbeat pulsing in the void, as the first echoes of the approaching swarm vibrated through the rock. Javier gripped the railing of the control room's overlook as the outpost's alarms wailed in a frantic crescendo, red lights pulsing like a frantic heartbeat across the consoles and walls. Elena's fingers flew over the central console, rerouting power from non-essential systems to bolster the outer defenses, her movements a blur of efficiency amid the rising chaos. "Swarm's estimated 2 minutes out," she said, her voice steady despite the sweat beading on her forehead from the oppressive heat of the overworked reactor. "Sensors picking up 50 enforcers, maybe more in the first wave. They're not probing this time. They're coming to erase us completely, no holds barred." He nodded, wiping blood from his lip where the earlier skirmish had split it open, the metallic tang lingering on his tongue. The wound on his side throbbed dully under the sealant patch, but pain was just background noise now, irrelevant to the task at hand. Around them in the control room, the last remnants of their makeshift crew buzzed with activity. Marcus, the wiry engineer with a perpetual squint from years staring at schematics, patching a flickering shield emitter with hasty welds, and Lena, the sharp-eyed navigator whose hands trembled slightly as she plotted escape vectors that dead-ended in the surrounding asteroid fields, her face pale but set. "Options on the table?" Javier asked, his eyes locked on the holographic display projecting the incoming threat. The Krath ships swarmed like angry hornets on the outer feeds, their twisted hulls glinting under the system's distant sun, formations tightening for assault. Elena glanced up from her work, her expression grim. "We hold the choke point at the main airlock. The bulkheads can seal off sections, buy us time to evacuate to the shuttle. But if they breach the inner perimeter..." She trailed off, the grim implication hanging heavy in the air like smoke. Marcus snorted derisively, soldering a wire with a hiss of sparks that lit his face momentarily. "Or we rig the fusion core for overload. Turn this entire rock into a bomb. Take half their fleet with us in the blast. Go out with a bang they won't forget." Lena shot him a sharp glare, her voice rising in protest. "And leave the Council's data behind. That's the legacy we're fighting for here. Irrefutable proof of what they did to our colonies. The sabotage they framed as natural expansion. We can't just blow it all to hell." Javier's jaw tightened, the weight of the decision pressing down. The data caches in the vault below held everything. Intercepted transmissions revealing the Krath Council's deliberate orchestration of human colony failures. Engineered disasters to justify their territorial grabs. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about vindication, exposing the rot at the heart of the so-called peace. No suicides, he decided firmly, cutting through the debate. "We fight smart, not desperate." Elena locked down the outer ring corridors, sealed them tight, Marcus, get those automated turrets online, even if they're jury-rigged. Lena, keep eyes on their approach patterns. Find us a weak spot in their formation we can exploit for escape. The deck shuddered as the first impacts rattled the hull, dull thuds echoing through the vents like the footfalls of giants. Elena slammed the override on the bulkhead controls, metal grinding as barriers dropped into place with resounding clangs. Turrets are at 30% functionality, Marcus reported, wiping sweat from his brow. They'll chew through incoming drones, but a full enforcer wave? That'll burn them out fast. Javier grabbed a pulse rifle from the nearby rack, checking the charge indicator with a quick glance. Then we make them pay for every inch they advance. No free rides. Marcus finished his patch on the emitter, the device humming back to life with a low whine. Shields are holding steady at the core vault. But if they manage to flank us through the service tunnels... A sharp crack split the air like a whip. The hologram flickered erratically, revealing two Krath enforcers slipping through a side vent on the perimeter, their armored forms scuttling forward like oversized insects, lances at the ready. Lena cursed sharply, her fingers freezing on the nav console. They're inside the perimeter already, bypassing the main airlock. Javier was already moving, rifle raised and charging towards the corridor access. Elena, cover my advance. Marcus, seal the door behind us once we're through. No letting them loop back. They burst into the corridor, the air thick with the acrid tang of ozone from sparking conduits and the faint metallic scent of alien intrusion. The enforcers twisted towards them in unison, batons crackling with stored energy as they assessed the threat. Javier fired first, the pulse bolt slamming into one shoulder joint and eliciting a mechanical screech of damaged servos. It lunged anyway, faster than its bulk suggested, claws extended. Elena flanked to the left, her shotgun barking in a thunderous report. The spread of pellets shredded the alien's leg joint, sending it sprawling across the deck in a tangle of limbs. "Got it down?" she called, pumping the action to chamber another round. But the second enforcer was on Javier in a flash, slamming him against the wall with bone-jarring force. Stars exploded in his vision. The rifle clattered away across the grating. He drove his knee up instinctively, connecting with its underbelly and feeling the give of synthetic flesh beneath the armor. "Behind you, another vent!" Elena yelled, her voice cutting through the din. He rolled aside, grabbing the fallen baton from the first enforcer in one fluid motion. The weapon hummed to life in his grip as he swung it in a wide arc. Blue fire arcing into the second's chest plate. It convulsed violently, armor splitting with a pop of sparks before collapsing in a smoking heap. Panting, Javier straightened, baton still clutched tight in his fist. Elena retrieved his rifle from the floor, tossing it back to him with a nod. "That's two more accounted for. But the main force is hammering the gates. Sounds like they're bringing the heavy cutters." Back in the control room, Marcus waved urgently at the display, his face illuminated by the flashing alerts. "Shields down to 20%. They're adapting to our patterns, jamming our signals to disrupt the turrets." Lena's face paled further, her voice barely above a whisper. "And we've got incoming on the vault level directly. If they reach the data caches..." Javier's mind raced, piecing together the outpost schematics in his head. The Krath had superior numbers and technology that bent physics in ways humans were still decoding, but they thought in rigid patterns, bound by hierarchies and protocols. Humans? They improvised, turning the environment itself into a weapon. "Wait, hold on," he said, his eyes narrowing at a particular overlay on the schematics. The geothermal vents running under the outpost. "Marcus, can we override the stabilizers and vent plasma up through the floor grates? Flood the lower levels with it?" The engineer blinked in surprise, then a grin split his face. "Crazy idea, but yeah, it could work. Override the safety protocols, direct the flow upward. It'll cook anything down there in seconds, but the backlash will fry half our own systems too. Consoles, lights, the works." Elena shook her head, caution warring with necessity. "It's too risky. We lose the core controls and we're dead in the water anyway. No way to recall the shuttle." "Or we lose the data," Javier countered, his tone unyielding. "And everything we've bled for up to this point. It's the vault or us." Lena met his gaze steadily, then nodded once. "Do it. I'll guide the plasma flow. Keep it as targeted as possible to the access corridors." The alarms blared louder as the outer bulkheads began to buckle under sustained assault, the structure groaning in protest. Javier hit the ship-wide comms. "All hands, brace for impact. We're turning up the heat, literally. Stay clear of the lower decks." Marcus worked the controls with feverish speed, sweat pouring down his face as he bypassed safeguards. The outpost groaned deeply, rumbles building from below like the growl of an awakening beast stirring in its lair. Pipes hissed warnings, steam venting in short bursts as pressure built. On the display, the enforcers poured into the lower levels. A tide of twisted limbs and glowing eyes advancing towards the vault corridor, batons raised to smash through the final doors. Then the floor erupted beneath them. Gouts of superheated plasma surged up through the grates in white-hot rivers, melting armor and fusing joints in mere seconds. Screeches filled the comms channels, cut short by the roar of the inferno as enforcers twisted and fell, their forms blackening amid the blaze. But the backlash hit hard and fast. Sparks showered the control room like deadly confetti, consoles shorted out in cascades of fire, lights flickering to emergency red as systems overloaded. Lena slumped in her chair, clutching a singed arm where a stray arc had grazed her. "Data's safe in the vault," she gasped, wincing. "But navigation's completely offline now. The plasma fried the relays." Elena checked the outer feeds quickly, her face illuminated by the glow. The swarm hesitated outside, their advance stalled by the sudden hellfire erupting from the outpost, enforcers incinerated in the vents. Yet more ships circled warily, regrouping for another push. Javier wiped soot from his face, the air thick with smoke and the chemical reek of burned circuits. "They'll try again soon, but we've shown them we're not easy prey. Bought ourselves a window." Javier's voice cut through the lingering haze of smoke and sparks, steady as the hum of the auxiliary generators kicking in to compensate for the fried systems. "We've shown them we're not prey to be hunted. But if navigation's offline, we're sitting ducks in this rock. Lena, can you reroute power to the shuttle's thrusters from here? Get us mobile again?" Lena gritted her teeth against the pain, her hastily bandaged arm throbbing under the wrap Elena had applied, the burn's angry red visible through the gauze. She hunched over the flickering console, fingers dancing across the keys despite the occasional shower of sparks that popped like angry fireflies from the damaged circuits. The air in the control room hung heavy, acrid with the scent of melted wiring and charred metal panels, the reactor's distant thrum the only steady sound amid the chaos. "Rerouting now as best I can," she replied, her voice strained but determined. "It's a mess down there. The plasma feedback fried half the relays, scrambled the routing. Give me 2 minutes and I might coax a limp out of the shuttle systems. But it'll be uneven. No fancy maneuvers." Elena leaned against the bulkhead for support, her eyes locked on the outer feeds displaying the swarm's positions. The Krath ships, sleek wedges of obsidian hull plating, predatory and unyielding, hovered at the edge of the plasma field's residual glow, their formations tightening like a noose drawing closed around the outpost. No aggressive push yet, but the hesitation wouldn't last. They were scanning the debris, analyzing the trap that had claimed their vanguard. "They're scanning the wreckage of those enforcers," she observed. "Whatever's left out there is buying us time, but not much. Javier, if we can't maneuver soon, they'll board us en masse next. Overwhelm the defenses." He nodded, already moving to the weapons station across the room, his boots thudding against the deck plates that still vibrated faintly from the geothermal eruption. Javier had always been the anchor in crises like this, the one who turned panic into purpose with a calm that bordered on stubborn defiance. Now his face was streaked with soot and sweat, but his hands were sure as he cycled through the targeting arrays, bringing what remained of the outpost's point defense systems online. "Boarding won't be easy for them," he assured her. "I've got the automated turret slaved to the outer perimeter. Full fire if they get within clamp range. Elena, suit up and take point on the airlock defenses. If they breach, you're our first line." She pushed off the wall, grabbing her helmet from the nearby rack and sealing it with a hiss, her voice filtering through the comms with a slight metallic edge. "Copy that. But we need a way out, not just a prolonged last stand. Lena, any luck on those reroutes?" A low groan escaped Lena's lips as another shower of sparks lit her workstation, forcing her to shield her face. She slammed the access panel shut, having jury-rigged power lines from the cargo bay schematics to bypass the damaged relays. "Halfway there. Thrusters are responding, but it'll be bumpy. Uneven thrust. We can dodge incoming fire, maybe even break atmo if we time it right. Just hold them off until I'm done." The first probe lanced in without warning, a sleek scout drone slipping past the plasma haze, silent and insidious. Javier's fingers tightened on the controls. Incoming probe, firing now. The outpost's turrets whirred to life outside, lasers stitching the void in brilliant azure lines that converged on the drone. It shattered in a bloom of debris, fragments winking out like dying stars against the black. But it was a feint. Behind the scout, 3 larger assault craft surged forward from the swarm, their hulls shimmering with energy shields that deflected the initial barrage of turret fire.
"Shields up to full,"
Javier barked, the entire structure shuddering as incoming fire grazed the hull, alarms blaring in response. Elena sprinted down the corridor towards the airlock, her mag boots clamping to the floor as the deck tilted under the outpost's improvised evasive thrusters firing in sequence. She could feel the G-forces pulling at her body, the mustard thrust from Lena's reroutes fighting against the damage to keep them from being an easy target. In her mind's eye, she pictured the swarm outside. Not mindless invaders, but a calculated force of enforcers upholding some ancient council decree that humanity had dared to challenge with their upstart presence. They'd come for the vault's data, the encoded legacy of human expansion, blueprints, and logs of worlds claimed against all odds. And now they meant to erase it utterly, leaving no trace. A proximity alert screamed through her helmet's audio feed. Boarding pods, 3 of them, latching onto the outer hull with magnetic clamps that thudded like hammer blows. Elena reached the airlock, cycling the inner door while priming the breach charges wired to the frame. "Pods attaching on the starboard side," she reported over comms. "Sealing bulkheads now. Javier, give me covering fire from the turrets." From the control room, Javier pivoted the outpost's limited thrusters, flaring them in a desperate arc to shake loose one pod. The maneuver bought seconds, the lasers carving into the exposed pod before it could fully deploy, exploding it in a silent fireball that lit the viewport. But the other 2 held firm, their hatches grinding open to spill armored enforcers into the corridors. Lena's voice crackled over the comms, triumphant amid the static interference. Navigation patched through the O-lines. "We're breaking free, hold on everyone." The outpost lurched forward, its engines, such as they were, roaring to life as it clawed away from the swarm's grasp. Javier watched the feeds intently, the assault craft peeling off in pursuit. But the lingering echo of the plasma field still disrupted their cohesion, scattering their formation. One enforcer ship veered too close in the chaos, caught in a residual gout of superheated gas venting from the outpost, its hull buckling under the thermal assault. Elena fired the first breach charge from the airlock, the blast wave rippling through the structure and venting the corridor. Screams echoed faintly through the vents, alien throats guttural and cut short by the vacuum. She advanced methodically, rifle raised, picking off the boarders one by one in the flickering emergency lights that strobed with each hit. A claw grazed her shoulder plate, sending sparks flying, but she twisted away, driving her boot into the intruder's chest with crushing force. It crumpled, bioarmor cracking like brittle eggshell under the impact. Back in the control room, Javier gripped the armrests as the outpost accelerated unevenly. "We're clear of the main plasma field now." Plotting a jump vector to the outer rim, Elena's handling the boarders. She'll link up soon. But the cost of the defense lingered heavily. Lena slumped back in her seat, her arms burn worsening as med gel seeped through the bandage, the pain etching lines on her face. The vault's data pulsed safely in the core memory banks, humanity's defiance encoded in unyielding lines of code and encrypted files. Yet the swarm regrouped in the distance, a persistent shadow on the scanners promising that the fight was far from over, only paused. Elena emerged from the corridor moments later, dragging a damaged Krath helmet as a makeshift trophy, her breath ragged but her posture unbroken. "Corridors are secure now," she reported, stowing her rifle. "But they got a signal beacon out before I sealed the last one. Expect company soon." Javier met her gaze across the room, the weight of their narrow escape settling between them like an unspoken pact. "Then we run hot, and we fight smarter next time. Turn their hunt into our ambush." Javier punched the override on the navigation console, the outpost's auxiliary engines humming to life with a low,